How can art transform the way we see ourselves?
At the very beginning, I was using my body to make all this work, but slowly it's been fragmenting and I've been like a magician and I've just disappeared my body off the stage. And I love that because the more comfortable I get in who I am, the less I need to sort of deal with that corporeal element that sort of fascinated me at the beginning.
Welcome to Conversations from the Collection. I'm your host, Zana Kobayashi. Before we jump into our episode today, if you've enjoyed this podcast from Newcastle Art Gallery, I'd love to invite you to leave us a 5-star rating or a glowing review, as it's truly the best way to help us reach more listeners. Now, for our final conversation of the season, we visit Owen Leong at Parramatta Artist Studios on the lands of the Darug people.
Hi, how are you?
Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming all the way.
How long have you been in this studio for?
Since July. It's a 2-year residency offered through Parramatta Artist Studios.
Amazing.
It's amazing. We have 6 artists here for 2 years, which gives you a really amazing amount of time to develop a significant body of work. And so this is my space.
For the past 2 decades, Owen Leong has developed a highly personal art practice that spans sculpture, photography, video, and installation. Through the lens of his own identity as a queer person of colour, Owen examines the social, political, and cultural forces that impact our lives. Often centering his own body within the frame, Owen has used his practice as a way to place himself within the world. Newcastle Art Gallery holds 2 photographic works by Owen Leong in our collection, Aura from 2014 and Invisible Light from 2016, that both speak to the influence of unseen forces upon the body. In this interview, Owen talks about the steely determination he has needed to pursue his career, the shared language art has created between him and his parents, and what makes him feel safe to continue creating work. As we begin our conversation, Owen explains why his decision to undertake a Master of Fine Arts at the University of New South Wales was viewed as somewhat controversial by his family.
I love my parents so much. They're beautiful, beautiful people, and they work so hard to bring us all up. We had a big family, and so growing up Chinese in Australia, there's this cultural expectation because they've worked so hard and they've come all this way that you should sort of like follow a certain path in life in order to be, safe and happy and comfortable. I also, at the same time, living in this sort of migrant household, I also sort of inherited their intensely strong will and determination to work hard. And so I guess that kind of flipped when it came to, going to school and starting to understand what I wanted to do. And, it's growing up Chinese, it's kind of like a very subtextual communication style. It's always the things that are not said rather than the things that are said that you kind of pay attention to. I kind of always wondered, why do we not talk about things like other people do? Everyone talks so directly and clearly about their feelings and emotions, and I had all these big feelings in me when I was growing up, and especially growing up queer in Australia as well. Like, as a queer person of colour, I was kind of questioning, like, where do I belong? Who am I? What does this all mean? All these big feelings and emotions. So I didn't know it at the time, but I guess it's because I'm a very somatic person and I experience things in my body a lot. And so I guess my body sort of was showing me that I kind of wanted to find a way to express these big feelings. And I didn't know what it was to be an artist at the time, but I just sort of felt drawn to that field of practice or discipline, because when I looked at artworks, it made me feel things from that person's perspective. So I knew that those artworks showed me, they were like beacons showing me that if you follow this path, you will also be able to create your own beacons and show other people how you feel on the inside. So, my parents, they were like, you have to study really hard, get excellent marks, and you can only be a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant, okay? I'm like, right. So I
What a choice.
What a choice. What a choice. I mean, wouldn't the world just be full of those 3 professions if that was the case? But, I studied really hard and I went to a great school and I got excellent marks. And I took those marks and I said, here you go, Mum and Dad, for all of your hard work, I got this amazing mark. And now I'm going to take that mark and I'm going to go to art school.
Wow.
And they were like, okay, we've got a live one here. So, I inherited their determination and their willpower, and in some ways it came back because it was such a gift. Like at the time, I didn't know what I was feeling, but now that I look back, I realize that determination and sort of ability to persevere and that willpower to just keep going is something that still holds me in good stead today as an artist.
Yeah, they are all things that you need to draw on as an artist.
There are so many things, so many hurdles in the way, let alone your own self-doubt and all of the things that come up, not only across time, across years, but when you're making a work that you face like these sorts of internal thoughts like, oh, is this good enough? What are people going to think? What do I think? Is this good enough for me? And you have to overcome these again and again and again. So that willpower that they gifted to me not only made me choose a path that was not something they thought was possible, but that I've shown over time that it has brought me great happiness and joy, and I've traveled the world and made beautiful works, and I'm really happy. So I have them to thank for that.
And has their perspective on that controversial choice that you made shifted, having seen your success? And
yeah, I think at first they didn't really understand what art was, but I guess I kind of gently brought them on that journey. And every time I had a show, I would invite them and get them to come, and I would say there's no right or wrong answer. It's whatever you see or feel or think. We can just talk about it. And so over time, I've elicited that kind of like ability to have conversations about work, about our feelings, and so they've really come on that journey with me. It's really beautiful. Yeah. And I did, when they felt comfortable, I did invite them to actually participate in an artwork.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about their series. It's the Blood Milk series from 2014, and they feature within your work. Yeah. Were they willing collaborators?
I'm the youngest, so I get away with everything. Sorry, brothers and sisters. No, but I would say that I'm a really great communicator, and so I guess I am sensitive to the way that I share ideas with them and invite them into a space. I always liken them to my parents are kind of like snails, beautiful snails that if you just are quiet enough and peaceful enough and you hold space, they'll bring their antennas out. But if you're too loud or too brash, or you take up too much space, they'll just quietly go back into their shells. So I brought them on that journey, and it was nerve-wracking because two of my most important things, my parents and my art world, and having to invite one into the other is quite a big thing. But I was surprised at how, I guess I'd been practicing for quite a while then, almost like 10 years by that point. So they'd seen the work that I've been making. They'd seen, that this is something that I was going to pursue. So then they were very quick to say yes. And I wanted to make sure that it was as comfortable for them as possible. I set up the lights and everything in their living room, and I warned them that, this is what's going to happen, and are you comfortable with this? And, I basically, to describe the images, it's a dip ditch. And it's kind of like a soft pink background, and on one side is dad in a white singlet, and on the other side is mom in a white top. And I guess this is where the sculptural element comes in, because I've always kind of used my hands to make sculptures that appear in the photographs. But in this one, it was this really beautiful plant, which is a kind of, it's a cereus, which is a night blooming cactus. And it's something that's always been around our home since I've been a kid growing up, but it's this beautiful cactus that has this exquisite flower that when we were kids, when our grandma was around, she'd say, "Come on kids, the flower's blooming, come out and have a look." And you'd all sort of trundle out behind grandma and into the summer night and look at the flower, and all the ants are trailing up to this beautiful perfume, and it's this exquisite, I don't know how to describe it, it's like a white cactus flower. But it only blooms for one night, and you don't really know when it's going to happen. So sometimes it doesn't bloom for years, sometimes it blooms a couple times, and she would always cut it and make a soup out of it. So there was this cultural transmission of not only of that tradition where as kids you'd go out and have a look with your grandma, and then she'd actually make a soup, and you would eat that soup because it was good for you. So jumping forward, we'd had this plant in our home where we grew up, and we took a cutting and we planted it in our next home where we grew up. also that sort of reflects the idea of taking a cutting from a plant and putting it in the ground or the earth somewhere else and letting another plant grow. So it's a kind of like a symbol of cultural transmission, or there's so many things in that.
Yes.
So I took the plant and then I dipped it in wax, and then in doing so I kind of destroyed the plant, because it's kind of like trying to hold on to that material with the wax, but it sort of destroys it if you hold on too tightly. And so I made that sculpture, and I got my dad to hold it and my mum to hold it, and I took a photograph of them closing their eyes. So yeah, it's actually called Cutting Dip-Ditch. Yeah.
It's a beautiful work.
Thank you.
Will you work with them again?
I don't know, if I had the opportunity, yeah, I would love to. I guess my work has changed direction after this long. I guess I've been practicing for almost 2 decades now. So yeah, so I guess it's kind of like following the ins and outs and the interesting pathways that open up to your practice if you're keen to observe where it's going to lead you. I've gone down a different path.
You've said as you've developed your career that there were little signs along the way that were telling you you were on the right path. Can you tell us what some of those little signs might have been?
That is a really interesting question. I think it's, again, kind of multi-layered. Obviously there are signs along the way that are professional, I guess, signposts, but I think also it's just listening to that intuition. I think all artists have a really strong internal voice, and I guess I really enjoyed when you make a work and you're in the flow, it's hard to describe, but it's a kind of like everything falls away and you're just in the zone. And so there's something really calm and just right that this is where you should be. And so I suppose that's the personal like beacon that's kind of like, you should be here. Try to be here as much as you can. Spend as much time as you can here. Even though it's complicated, it's emotionally fraught, it's all these things that you should be here for this when it happens.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, beautifully,
Okay.
beautifully. I wanted to move into some of those, like, I guess, fraught or difficult topics that you cover off in your work, maybe starting with the body, which is a really constant presence within your work. You're often creating self-portraits, or you produce adornments, or even your sculptural work often references back to the physical form. Why is the body, and particularly the depiction of your body, so important to your practice?
Yeah, great question. I grew up in the era of Pauline Hanson. So back in 1996, she made that very infamous maiden speech where she said that Australia was being swamped by Asians. And I feel dirty just even giving that more airtime. But, but you know, it's important because when it's the context of that time in history when you're growing up as a queer person of colour, as a Chinese Australian in Australia, and you see this powerful person, or a person in a position of power. I wouldn't say she's powerful, I would say she's in a position of power and she uses that power. Then you question all sorts of things about who you are as you grow up, and you sort of wonder, why are certain voices elevated, and what can I do in my life or in my practice to elevate the voices of those who might not have that agency? And so I started with what was most easy, and also for me was most logical, was to use my own body and to reframe and recenter my body in the camera lens, because, you know, at that time not a lot of diversity was reflected in media. I think it's so much better now, and things have shifted and changed so much more. But back at that time, you know, it was different. And so in my work, I wanted to reframe the Asian body and make work that explored that. But at the same time, I was really interested in the transmission of these forces across the body. So, like, how do politics and social ideas and culture, how do these things move across the body? Because I was sort of living between two cultures and sort of feeling and thinking about these things all the time. So I guess that's why I wanted to use my body in that sense.
Place it into
the world and question it, and have objects that do adorn the body or are placed onto the body that make you question that.
You've referred to it sometimes as hiding in plain sight. Is that correct? Or is that still a term that you connect with?
Yeah.
And I guess I asked that question because some of your work plays a lot with sort of like concealing, revealing the internal, the external. Often your face is covered. So it's sort of this like push and pull between being revealed, but there's still also a part of you that's a little bit concealed as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's so many elements to that. I guess if you think about it, like all these socio-political cultural forces are invisible unless you look for them, or unless you slow down and break apart like what you're absorbing through media and conversations and culture, and how is it affecting you. So there's an invisibility to the power of that energy that moves across our lives and that we're carried upon. I am super sensitive, and so like by putting yourself in the middle of the frame, it's quite vulnerable. But there's an aspect of me that's also that steel determination and willpower that I got from my family that's like, I'm gonna do it anyway.
Yeah.
Because I need to, because the work wants to go that way. And so there is like an exposure, and most of my photographs are not wearing clothes, but there are like objects or sculptures that I will place on the body that do conceal or protect me. Some series have been about creating like a sort of armor around the body. So the body is sort of like encased in metallic armor or cloth that's been cut. So there is that protective element, but also the exposed element, because that's kind of how we move through life, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way of talking about it. You employ everyday items like milk, wax, honey, and leather within your work, and they create like quite a visceral experience for your audience. Could you talk about the symbolic and sensory value of the materials in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I said before, I'm really somatic, so I experience the world through my body a lot. And I suppose when I make work, I'm really drawn to not only the materiality of the medium, but also its symbolism and its tactility. And so very early on, because of the way that in my culture food is so important and it's a way of expressing emotions, I ended up somehow using food in my work, but adding other valency to it. So in the sense that one of my earliest performance videos called Infinite Love was a video where I made a heart cast out of frozen milk. And in the video, it starts to melt and it drips, and then it cuts between that image of the melting heart of milk and my face, which is a close-up. And again, the pink background, I'm wearing a black cow neck, and my mouth is held open with a surgical stainless steel oral retractor. And so basically, it's just the milk heart melting into my mouth. So it's at once very beautiful, but also it starts to get uncomfortable because I can't speak and I have no control. So there is this push-pull between agency and lack of control. So in that sense, for me, when I was making that early work, it was really the symbolism of the color, of the whiteness and the power of whiteness in our culture, and how it's sort of forced into your body. And how do you deal with that in your own sense of self and work through that?
Yes.
So it's just a little window into that feeling of, you know, how whiteness has an effect on people of color.
I've heard you use a beautiful term before about being force-fed whiteness.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Which I thought I'd never considered it in that way, but an incredible analogy for living in Australia, particularly during the 80s and 90s, or you know, previous to that.
Yeah, and in parallel, I mean, I suppose there was another piece that I made at a similar time that was with honey. And so again, there's this sort of golden yellowness of the honey, and it's just a performance video of me against a white background. The honey drips on my face and my head, and I start to push and pull at my face as the honey drips, and then it just keeps dripping and it becomes really slippery and kind of coats my skin. It's actually called second skin, and I guess it's like, how do I negotiate that sense of identity, cultural identity within me on the surface and underneath? Yeah, so there's always been this sort of duality between trying to understand and critique whiteness, but also to process my cultural identity in the work.
You've said before that you can't escape your Asian face, and no matter how hard you try to assimilate into mainstream culture, there's been sort of, you know, no way for you to really permeate into that. Do you still feel this way, and do you think that it's changing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've worked through a lot of things now that I'm a bit older, and I'm so much more comfortable in my own skin. And I guess looking back, when you make work, it's only when you look back over your shoulder that you see all the signposts of where you've come from. And so I do see that over time, at the very beginning, my body was centered and I was using my body to make all this work. But slowly it's been fragmenting and I've been breaking it down and sort of slowly disappearing from the work. And I love that, because the more comfortable I get in who I am, the less I need to deal with that sort of corporeal element that sort of fascinated me at the beginning. And also the world has changed, and I don't know, there's so many things that have shifted. And so more recently, I've literally been like a magician and I've just disappeared my body off the stage. And at the same time, it's absolutely still connected. All of my sculptural work is absolutely still connected to the body. I think I'll always be fascinated in the body, because it's just a symbol of, we're each like a portal into another world. And so for me, the works are like portals into just that moment of thinking, or like an intimate diary entry or journal entry for that time and that moment. So, yeah.
I think this could be a good time to discuss a recent shift that I've sort of noticed within your practice. Obviously, sex and sexuality and queer identity have always been investigated, but in more recent years, there's been a real shift in, I guess, the way that theme is represented through your practice, through your choice of materials in your sculptures and the way you're presenting yourself within the frame. And I was wondering what had prompted that shift, or whether it was a conscious shift.
In my mind, I think last year in 2023, obviously we had World Pride in Sydney, and for me there was this genuine awakening for some reason. Dancing with 20,000 queer folk of all different stripes and tribes, and you could be of any part of the community and we were together. And there was an energy in the domain that day when I just felt like I really understood the word pride. I really understood the word community in that moment. Like I knew it, I obviously knew it logically, but I felt it in my heart. And so I guess like when you make work, it's so vulnerable sometimes, and you're literally going into your consciousness and bringing a light out and putting it on the wall. And people may like it, they may hate it. There's so much judgment, and there's all these other elements of the industry that are mechanical and cold surrounding this very emotional, intimate thing. So when I made work as a young artist, it was couched in theory and concepts and armor, and you can't hurt me, but I'm still going to make the work that I want. But now that I'm older, I realize that life is just so short. And so I guess looking back again, you can see elements of that queer eroticism in the work, but it's tied to that early exploration of power, because some of the photographs, I have a latex hood covering me, so I can't see, I can't talk. There's oral retractors that open your body to the world, but you silence you at the same time. There's this sort of darkness in that early work, and I would say that darkness is still there now, but what I've discovered is that darkness comes from having society tell you that you don't belong. It's from society that makes you feel other. And what's wonderful about queer folk is that we are able to take power that oppresses us and invert it and turn it into something that's joyful, or that is constructive, or that we can work through together in a way that is safe and consensual and very empowering. Does that make sense?
That's so beautiful.
Right.
And would you say that the works that you're exploring about queer identity now is more about like pleasure and celebration, or?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So I'm drawing on queer kink aesthetics, and you might look at the materials and there might be leather cuffs, or there might be rubber, or like industrial spreader bars, or these elements that appear a little bit scary to some people, a little bit dark. But that's not what it's about at all, because for me, like I explained, it's about taking that power and holding it in my own hands and using it to make the work that I want to express queer joy with. because I'm at a place in my life now where I'm just incredibly happy and comfortable with who I am. And it's scary that the work is going that way, but I think I need to lean into it and let it will lead me where it wants to go.
What makes it scary when you say it's scary that the work is going that way?
Because I suppose you feel vulnerable being so authentic. And sometimes there's so many dimensions to art, which is what makes it amazing. And all artists explore their own idiosyncratic interests and things like that. But when you put it out into the world, it's a very vulnerable thing. But there's something about artists that's also very kind of sadomasochistic. Like we do it in a way, like you feel extremely exposed emotionally, and then you do it again and again and again and again. But because, you know why, there's a kind of catharsis in that. There's a kind of healing. There's a kind of processing of emotions and thoughts and feelings, and that's what makes it beautiful. Yeah. Making art can be so painful sometimes. Actually, I had a really long creative block, and I just did not know where the creativity had evaporated to. I need to feel really safe and comfortable in order to make work, and I think I had like wedged myself into this super stable corner of life where I just wasn't uncomfortable anymore. And I realized it was actually my practice telling me you kind of need to shift from photography and focus on sculpture for a while.
Yeah.
And when I listened to it and I leaned into making objects and okay, let's go for it, everything just opened and blossomed again. So it was a really interesting, it's kind of like any practice, like meditation or yoga, or it's a practice for a reason. When you practice it and you listen to the signs and look for the symbols, it'll tell you where to go. You just have to facilitate it. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because we spend a lot of our time trying to make our lives so comfortable, but actually gets in those uncomfortable spaces or the slightly pressured spaces where we find the best things.
Absolutely, yeah. You have to trust in yourself, yeah. I think there's many different types of artists. Some artists love to like throw caution to the wind and run with the energy, and it's beautiful, like there's a wildness to it. Others like to be, like me, I need to be super safe. And maybe that's that thing where my parents are like, you better work hard and make sure you save enough money or you'll be on the street. And so I suppose somewhere deep inside, I have to feel safe for my creativity to work.
How do you find a sense of safety as an artist? Because I mean, it is it's a career that essentially is terrifying to some people.
It's terrifying. Yeah.
So how do you create that sense of safety for yourself?
I have a part-time job, which I've had for a really long time. Yes, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes. Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that.
Yes.
There is this kind of mythology in the art world that if you're not a full-time artist, you're not quite an artist, or you haven't made it, or you've failed. That is wrong. There are so many different ways to be an artist, and it's about facilitating the way that your mind and your heart works best. So, like we said, some people will just jump into the deep end and go full-time, and it works. Others, it doesn't work that way. And so I have a part-time job, and I've had it for a very long time, and I break my week up into Monday to Wednesday, my part-time job, Thursday to Saturday, my studio work, and Sunday, I will live my life just for that one day of the week. Because you need to nourish your art practice with your life and the way that you perceive and experience the world. Otherwise, there's no nourishment. You've got to water that plant.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it creates a freedom and a security within your practice.
Absolutely. And
yes.
I don't need to worry about that work needing to sell for X amount in order to pay the bills. And there's nothing wrong with that either, because I have many friends and they're very successful, and that is a beautiful thing that is in their practice. And then there are other people that are completely experimental or not material practice based or conceptual, and that's fine too. Or social. There's so many doorways for social art practice these days. The other thing that creates safety for me is that because I'm so somatic, I do a lot of exercise because it grounds me physically.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I have a loving partner.
Oh yeah.
I have a loving partner of 18 years, and he keeps me like just fed, and everything that a partner does, like nurturing, supportive, anything goes. I can do my residencies overseas, I can come back, there's no barriers. He loves me, he loves my work, he wants to support and nurture it, and so those elements create safety for me to make work.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
I'd love to jump back now to 2014 and 2016 and speak about your works in Newcastle Art Gallery's collection. That's Aura from 2014 and Invisible Light in 2016. They both depict your body draped in a laser cut fabric, and one image has black fabric against a pink colour-filled background and the other with white fabric against a white background. And in both of those works, your face and identity are obscured. Can you talk about the ideas that these works are exploring and also how you went about making them?
So Aura, that's one of my favourite pieces actually. I'm so glad that it's in the Newcastle Art Gallery. You know, some pieces capture the feelings of a couple of years in your life really well, and in Aura it really crystallised in that moment. And I suppose at the time I was thinking of medicalization of the body, or the way, like, why do we listen to some ideas about what's right or wrong? Or being queer was wrong according to doctors for a long time. So it's like, who says that that's wrong and right? And so I took this really old engraving of the circulation system, which is like a symbol of the way that ideas move through not only our internal bodies, but around us. And I transferred it to a big piece of leather, and I hand cut it. And I just wanted to play with leather and cut it into this sort of skin and drape it over my body, kind of like a protective thing, but also it hovers like a shadow. And if you look closely in the photo, there's also the surgical stainless steel oral retractor that holds my mouth open. So I'm facing away from the camera, but it's in there. A few years later, when I made Invisible Light, I was sort of more exploring sort of my own Chinese heritage and the way that Eastern philosophy informs like traditional Chinese medicine practices and ideas of healing. And so in that one, it's kind of like a partner piece, actually, I realize now, like a twin, because I took an ancient Chinese illustration of the energy meridians, which are kind of like the energy channels through which life force is meant to move across the body, or qi. And then I cut that out of white leather. And it's in a beautiful cocoon of glowing white light, and it's very gentle and soft, and my head is tilted slightly down, so there's this kind of feeling of safety. But in that sense, in that moment in time, it's kind of like an armor of skin. Yeah.
They sit so beautifully together.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because they were made sort of 2 years apart, and were you conscious of the sort of relationship between the two of them at the time of making them, or?
I think I realize now that I make things in pairs. I have an idea and I make something, and I'm like, I really enjoyed that idea or that feeling or emotion. I just want to make it again. And so maybe sometimes it happens straight away, sometimes it happens across a few years apart, but it's just the way my brain works. And at first I thought, oh no, you shouldn't be doing this, they should all be different, and they should all have different scales and this and that and how it should be. But my mind just likes to make things in pairs. So I guess instinctively I made that piece, knowing that I had come from Aura, but that I was now interested in Chinese medicine and working with bronze cast Chinese mushrooms and using like herbs to create armor and objects and things like that, and casting chicken's feet, and all these, just exploring the materiality of Chinese culture and medicine and food. And so then I just ended up making that cut leather piece that's like the energy meridians.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
You've also worked as a curator and a writer, including a stint as the editor of Peril magazine. And I was wondering how your engagement with sort of the more administrative side of the art world has influenced your practice.
Yes, so I used to be the arts editor for Peril, which is an amazing Asian Australian arts and culture magazine based out of Melbourne. And my mind is highly organised and structured. So I am really good at administration and arts management and curatorial things. So there's a part of me that is extremely organised and scheduled. I would say over-scheduled.
A nice counterbalance to the chaotic art world.
I actually find in my practice I'm always rubbing up against the friction of being so ordered and scheduled. So I'm learning to let go over many years of being so structured. And I guess it kind of comes through my work in that it's very often minimal, very elegant, clean. It has that sparseness to it. But within that, there is the unruliness of art itself. When you think you want to make a work a certain way, the material will tell you, I don't want to be that way. This is how I want to be. And you either listen to it or you don't. But going back to your original question, I love administration. It gives me structure and to be wild in my studio, to explore wherever my mind takes me in terms of reading or music or podcasts or anything experiential. So there's a counterpoint between doing the arts management, curatorial stuff, which I love because it's a world of ideas and structured essays and writing. And what I loved about Peril was that it was elevating, people of color and creatives of color and the voices that you might not normally hear in mainstream arts journalism or arts media. And I realized that has carried through to my practice now, because in the way that I'm approaching shows that are coming up, I want to use my practice in whatever way I can to try and elevate some of those voices as well. So in my next show at Arterial Gallery in Sydney, rather than having a traditional exhibition essay, I've invited a person of color, an amazing writer, to respond creatively to the works in the show, and not necessarily like in a way that literally describes them. I've just said, here are some of the ideas. I want you to just take it and run. And here are some points that you might want to consider, but I trust in your work. I want to elevate your voice. Let's go. So we'll see what happens.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about mentors and role models in this series, and I was wondering if I could ask you who helped to amplify your voice along the way.
If there was one person I had to pick as a mentor, I would have to say Lindy Lee. I, at one point, did start doing a PhD, and Lindy was my supervisor for that time. I did it for about 6 months, but in that time, I realized that my body, again, was telling me, this doesn't feel right in this academic setting. I mean, I love reading beautiful theory, well-written theory, I love it. But for me, at that moment in my time, I think I remember one day just saying to Lindy, I don't want to do this anymore. My body's telling me to follow the work and do the practice. And she said, you know what? If your body's telling you to do that, just follow it. And it kind of gave me permission to listen to the work. It'll take you where you need to go. So in that sense, she was a mentor. I don't know, but I think in Australia, it's few and far between. Like, Asian Australian artists, there's more now, but like growing up, I felt quite alone. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm happy to walk this path on my own. But I hope that in making the work that I make, and that in the future I could be a mentor to others, or I could be a beacon on that pathway, on their own beautiful journeys to wherever they're going. That, look, someone has walked this path in this way. Maybe if I have that creative urge in me, I can do it my way. But at least there's a couple of people walking ahead of you so that they're forging through the wilderness, leaving little beacons of safety. You can do it.
I would say your work is definitely already having that impact.
Thank
Absolutely. We featured your work recently in the Inside Out exhibition. It was a public exhibition in Newcastle for World Pride, and so many of our local emerging artists were just so thrilled to have their work featured next to yours.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, so you're ticking that box already.
I'm so humbled and privileged. Yeah.
Well, Owen, we've reached our final question for our interview today. If you could have dinner with any artist from Newcastle Art Gallery's collection, who would it be and why?
Newcastle Art Gallery has such a huge collection of artists. It took me so long to go through all of the different pages. But I think if I could have dinner with one artist, it would probably be Damien Shen, who's a First Nations Ngarrindjeri artist with Chinese heritage as well. And I love the works in the gallery's collection because there are these beautiful, delicate tintypes, self-portraits as well, which are also etched. And there's just a very powerful way that Damien explores his dual identities in his work. And I would love to just have a meal and talk to him about his ideas and practice.
You'd have so much to talk about, I'm sure. Well, thank you so much, Owen. We've had such a beautiful day here in your studio, and thank you for taking us through your practice.
Thank you so much. The privilege is all mine.
If you'd like to know more about Owen or his works in Newcastle Art Gallery's collection, there are links in the show notes, or you can visit the gallery's website at nag.org.au. Thank you for joining us for Season 2 of Conversations from the Collection. If you've enjoyed listening, we would really appreciate if you left us a review or shared us with a friend. Conversations from the Collection is a Newcastle Art Gallery production, and we pay our deepest respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast was produced. This project was supported by the New South Wales Government through Create New South Wales.